Hello and welcome to Breakthroughs with Bree, where we are discussing all the topics that create extraordinary breakthroughs in our personal and spiritual development journeys. I'm Bree, otherwise known as Healing with Bree, and I'm a spiritual coach and Akashic Records channelers who helps sensitives and intuitives connect more deeply with their hearts, intuition, and souls, and teaches people how to process and alchemize the fears and beliefs that hold them back from living in their authenticity and purpose. You're in the right place if you like to hear about spirituality, psychology, healing, consciousness, manifestation, developing your spiritual and intuitive gifts, and living from your heart and soul instead of from your fears and ego. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Breakthroughs with Bree. I have to say, if you are not watching on video, you're missing out because the hair is hairing today. She's looking so good. I have naturally curly hair, and for anybody who's a naturally curly girly, you know the struggle. You know how you just never know how it's going to be that day when you wake up. You're trying products. I just recently got it colored. So like, how are the curls going to respond to the bleach? You just never know. And honestly, that makes it even more thrilling when times like this happen, when the hair is just looking so good. I'm so grateful. So anyway, if you want to see what I'm talking about, check out the video version of this podcast, which is on YouTube or on Spotify, or I suppose you can just check out the clips when I post them on my Instagram, Healing with Bree, or the podcast Instagram, Breakthroughs with Bree, or on TikTok. I wanted to do a quick little episode today about healthy conflict. I feel like this is going to be a big focus for some of the work that I do with clients moving forward, because really in almost every single one-to-one coaching container I've been in, one of the things that we've had to relearn and recondition is our understanding of what a healthy relationship dynamic looks like, in particular, what healthy conflict resolution looks like. And look, no shade, no hate. Our parents did the best that they could with what they knew. They did the best that they could trying to model to us how to navigate conflict so that we could still stay connected to where we could reach resolution with all of the things and skills and stuff that they had themselves, and they didn't have a lot. So most of us were modeled really unhealthy or sort of toxic ways of navigating conflicts with other people. So it makes sense that a lot of us sensitives, or sensitive girlies and guys, would then have this fear of conflict, because what we're really fearing is the toxicity. What we're really fearing is the rupture, is the disconnection. But conflict resolution is the way to go from disconnection and rupture back into connection, and actually into connection that's deeper, that has more trust, that has more resilience. And that's something that brings us a lot of relief. That's something that brings us a lot of safety and peace in a relationship, is when conflict or something can happen and we know that we're going to be able to get back on the same page with that person, that they're going to be gracious, that they're going to be self-responsible, that they're going to be curious, and that they're going to have the same goal that you do, which is reasonably maintaining the relationship. So for anybody who says, oh, I'm afraid of conflict, I would challenge that, and I would maybe not use that language anymore. Or if you say, I'm not good at conflict, maybe instead you say, I am learning how to be more comfortable with conflict resolution, and I'm learning healthier ways to move through conflict so that I still feel safe. So let's talk about that today. Honestly, I think a big part of this episode is going to be having like a heart-to-heart with you. I'm gonna hold your hand through this episode about some things that we grew up thinking were normal that are in fact not normal, that are in fact not healthy. And it's really important that our perspective, the way that we're sort of judging and analyzing what's happening around us appropriately. Because if we're in a dynamic and something happens and we think, oh, that's just normal, or yeah, okay, that's just another day with so-and-so, and we don't sit back and say, wait a minute, like that is actually a sign of something a lot deeper. And I need to see that so that I can take the appropriate action. Like you can see how the outcome of both of those would be very different. So I'm going to cover some sort of like red flags in conflict resolution. This might be something that we've seen ourselves do. This might be something that we've seen friends or family members or partners do. And I just want to say right off the jump, I am not pointing these out to judge those people or yourself as bad. I don't think that that's necessary, and I don't think it's true. We can choose actions that are not in alignment with like our default pure energy and still be good. right? This is also a big part of my work I do with clients, is how can you take accountability without shaming yourself? And if you're able to take accountability without shaming yourself, you're actually in a position to take way more accountability than if you introduce shame, because our bodies run from shame as fast as they possibly can in every situation they can, right? So this is not to shame your partners, your friends, your family members, or yourself, but it is to be able to objectively look at what's going on and determine, is this healthy? Is this extremely unhealthy? Is this kind of in the middle of the spectrum? Is this something that can be easily worked on? Or are these all together signs that this is actually a toxic, unhealthy, or abusive dynamic? Because being able to see that as such gives you more information, more power to make decisions about how you want to move forward. Every single person I talk to wants healthier relationships in their life. They want more reciprocal relationships. They want more joyful relationships. They want relationships with more depth and intimacy. And I find sort of the initiation into that part of their life usually has to do with, can they start to identify what's going on in the relationships they currently have, and can they start moving differently in those? Can they start seeing those more clearly? And can they walk away in some cases from relationships that are clearly not aligned, that are clearly not matching the kind of relationship that they want to have with people? That's kind of like the through the fiery crucible kind of moment that a lot of clients, friends, myself have gone through when we are saying that we really want that community that's rich and healthy and supportive. Is we got to look at the community we do have around us, and often we got to shift things a little bit. So let's talk about conflict. Conflict is what happens when there is a rupture in a relationship. A rupture is anything as simple as like a misunderstanding. This could be where somebody has been hurt by something the other person has said or done. In extreme cases, this can be betrayal. This can be hurtful words. If there's hurtful actions, like actually abuse, again, that's kind of like on the more extreme end of the spectrum. I'm going to assume that we're maybe not at the extreme end, but of course, if that is something a part of the equation, please take that into consideration. But in a healthy sphere, it's usually just a misunderstanding, right? There's a misunderstanding that causes one or both people in the relationship to feel upset, hurt feelings towards the other person. Somebody has acted in a way that sort of like violates what they would expect of each other, or what they feel like a healthy, supportive relationship looks like. And conflict is what happens when one or both parties is upset and they come in to interact around that, right? Sometimes it's passive aggressive conflict where the feelings are kind of spilling over into tone and all of this kind of stuff, but you're not really talking about what you're talking about. And sometimes it is an attempt to discuss what was upsetting, one person or both, and how that conflict resolution goes down is what either gives you the opportunity to repair it and to have the relationship be stronger on the other end of the repair, or to ultimately cause more ruptures and more conflict, because that initial, I'll say in quotes, conflict resolution, which is probably not really what it was, probably more of like a negative communication cycle, right? Causes more damage. And there not only is not a repair for the original thing, but now there's more to repair from that conflict resolution, right? Okay, I'm feeling like I want to start by just doing a quick synopsis of what healthy conflict looks like. I'll say about this with me and my partner, but really this is going to be true for me and my friends. Let's just say I'm out with my partner, we're in a group, and they say something that kind of hurt my feelings, right? Maybe it was kind of something I thought was an unnecessary jab, or maybe they didn't, consider me in a situation where I wanted them to consider me, or they just did something that felt like it hurt my feelings, right? And in the moment, I am not wanting to ridicule them. I don't want to start a scene. I don't want to do any of that, which is a healthy thing, by the way, especially if you're with other people or if it's just not appropriate, right? So I do my best to regulate myself in the moment and sort of prepare myself to talk to my partner at the next available opportunity that makes sense. That's another sign of healthy conflict resolution, is both partners being thoughtful about when there might be an opportunity to have a conflict resolution conversation, which means you have a little bit of time, you have a little bit of space, both partners have some emotional capacity, because those are all things that we need to have those conversations, right? So I wait, and then I sit down with my partner and I get ready to have this conversation. Now, some of the work that I do ahead of time is I do self-inquiry, and I come into my body. I say, okay, how did that make me feel? Maybe it made me feel unseen. Maybe it made me feel unconsidered. Maybe then something comes up about a past conversation we've had where I've specifically asked them to be more thoughtful. And now there's this whole story about how they don't consider me and they ignore things that I've said and just blah, 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 blah. Like, I connect with what is going on there. Now, one of the things that I do is I use the language, I'm telling myself a story that as a way to honor the feelings and the thoughts that come up, but give just a little bit of distance to where I'm leaving space that that's not what's actually happening, but that's just the story that's coming up in my mind about it. Because one of the important things that we got to recognize is that our interpretations of things, at least initially, is missing a lot of information. It's missing other things that might have been going on with them that we didn't see happening or know was happening. It might be thoughts and intentions that the other person had, again, that we didn't know. There's like a whole nother thing with other people that's going on inside their own brains from their own eyes we don't know about. So until we have a conversation where we learn more about what happens, we cannot make a full judgment of what exactly was going on, which again, when I say the language, I'm telling myself a story that you don't care, you weren't thinking of me, and because we've talked about it before, you don't listen to me or whatever. It leaves space that, while that is my story, that might not be the truth of the situation. So I'm checking with myself while I'm doing that story. I also think to myself, are these any of my triggers? Do any of these things feel kind of like bigger in proportion to what's happening than what's actually happening? Because that is a sign that that is like a repeating cycle trigger of mine that I need to manage, that I need to process, and that it's not so much just about this circumstance, right? It doesn't mean that it's not important or that it shouldn't be addressed, but I know that there's like extra emotional ammo behind it for me, and that's something I'm going to be aware of, right? So I sit down and come with my partner and I say, hey, like there's something I want to talk to you about. I'm kind of having like hurt feelings about this. Is that something that, you know, you can talk about with me right now? Again, giving them the opportunity to say, yes, I have capacity for this. No, I don't. I'm not coming at him. I'm not accusing him, saying, hey, I just want to have a conversation. My partner says yes, right? So we sit down and I will use the language exactly like I said, where it's not accusatory. It's not making negative judgments about their character or their intent, but it's describing what my experience was with the situation. It might be, hey, this thing happened while we were out today, and in the moment, it upset me because I felt like XYZ. The story I was telling myself in that moment, or the way that it felt, was XYZ. And that was really hurtful to me because, you know, we've talked about you considering my feelings before, and that's really important to me. And maybe if there's a trigger, that's an opportunity for me to say, and I kind of have a trigger around this. And maybe you've talked about this before, or maybe you haven't, but that can be an opportunity to get vulnerable. You know, I have a little bit of a trigger about this, and I'm really trying to own that. But it would be really helpful if, you know, you took a little bit of extra time to think about this or adjust this in the future, because this was like really, really painful for me. Here's what a healthy partner is going to do. They are going to give a shit that they hurt your feelings. And the way they're going to show that they gave a shit that they hurt your feelings is by simply responding to the fact that the person that they care about is in front of them in pain, period. They're going to say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Of course, I did not mean to hurt your feelings. You're right. That was kind of thoughtless. Oh, I'm so sorry you're in pain. It makes total sense. You have a trigger about that, right? And you say, thank you. And, you know, in this case, you could say, can you tell me more about what happened, or like what was going through your mind? I don't really understand, right? You could explicitly like ask for them to share more, or maybe they just naturally share more about, hey, here's what was going on for me. And at that moment, I become open-minded to learn more information about what was happening, because really in my heart, I assume the best for the people I'm in relationships with. I assume that they don't want to hurt me. I assume that they're not selfish assholes, because if they were, I probably wouldn't be friends with them, you know? Like, I am holding true what I know about them, and I'm leaving sort of this benefit of the doubt of like, the part of this is a misunderstanding, or maybe they just didn't know to consider something before this situation. Maybe this is a part of our relationship we've never really discussed before, right? And this is giving us the opportunity to do that, but again, going in with a little bit of that benefit of the doubt. So anyway, when they're sharing your story, you're opened up about that, you're really taking that in, you're really considering that, especially because, you know, they were able to receive your feelings with such kindness and with empathy. And then you say, okay, you know, that makes sense. I'm kind of updating my story now about what happened with your information, and I can see how that happened, right? Now, at this point, depends on what the conversation is, like there might still need to be adjustments that's made on one or both parts. Like even with the context from your partner, like it still might have been a shitty thing that they did, or it still might be something that like what they were considering really isn't in proportion. It's like smaller in proportion to this thing that you're talking about, right? And that's something you got to learn how to be able to talk about with your partners. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you're like, wow, I really distorted how I was looking at that because of my own insecurities. Like it makes total sense what you're saying. Thank you for explaining that to me. And maybe you talk about the path forward to where you guys can both interact and feel safe coming into this situation in the future. Maybe that's a little bit of a, I'm going to kind of work and process this, or I'm going to be more mindful of this, or I'm going to like really believe what you're telling me in this situation. And partner of mine, can you also be a little bit more thoughtful about this? Or like, what are some ways you think that you could make adjustments to help prevent this from happening in the future? Maybe they make some suggestions, whatever. And they're like actively engaged in finding a solution where, again, both people are reasonably accommodated and both feel respected and happy moving forward. Usually I also like at the end for there to be like a little bit of like a connection reestablishing. Maybe you're giving a hug, maybe you're giving compliments, maybe you're saying, I really love you, I really appreciate, your ability to talk through this with me and to kind of like reflect and take responsibility for your own part and not to get defensive. Like, it makes me feel so good in our relationship. Like, I really appreciate that about you. Like, kind of doing some of that stuff that brings the feel good back into it. And then that's that. You might have to have that conversation over a couple of days of, both parties need time to kind of reflect on their parts and come back with some solutions. And then the most important part about that is that the people actually do what they say. And this is one of the red flags for a lot of clients that I've been with, is that you'll find people that know how basically how to con you, and they'll kind of say just enough. They'll be just self-aware enough for you to be like, oh, okay, maybe they get it. But they don't actually follow through on any of the stuff that they said they were going to do. And sure enough, you have that conflict over and over and over again. And they say it's about something else. And they say there's an exception and blah, 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 blah. But when you take a step back, that same thing happens again and again and again. That is a sign that you are with a partner who is either emotionally mature, toxic, not motivated to be doing any internal changes themselves, or in the worst case scenarios, like actually abusive and emotionally manipulative. So that is one of the red flags, is this conflict happening over and over again? And no matter, again, because sometimes us little sensitive babes, we put it all on us. Like, did I not explain it right? Did I not say it right? Or maybe this was an exception, and we're trying to like make all these allowances. But no, healthy people sit down, and when somebody tells them something, especially in this vulnerable moment, especially something that's hurting somebody they care about, they hear it and they make effort to change. Does that mean that they never make a mistake again? Of course not. But we know the difference. We know this, right? We know the difference between somebody who has actually made a big effort and things have started to change, and they have a little moment where, things get a little funky for a minute, but they're genuinely trying. They own up to it right away. And you can see they're going to therapy, they're reading the books, they're getting out of their comfort zone, really trying to improve this for the sake of the relationship and for themselves, versus people who will basically just do lip service. So it's one of the red flags. Another red flag, in contrast to what I just described, is as soon as there is hurt feelings, things escalate into name calling, loud voices, accusations, etc. This is so common nowadays, but that doesn't make it healthy, right? If you or your partner, when you're angry, are escalating to name calling or to insulting or to demeaning each other, trying to cut each other down, being passive aggressive or being demeaning, or, maybe weaponizing really vulnerable things that you've told them before as a way to kind of cut you down or something, as soon as there is a disagreement or they hear something they don't want to hear, or they perceive that they're being attacked or something, that is a sign of somebody who is not only emotionally immature, but is reacting to very normal things that happen in relationships. Ruptures are very normal in an unhealthy way. Again, this isn't something we have to shame ourselves about, but it's really important to see this clearly. And if you're one of these people, because I'll totally own this, a past version of me would get really loud. I don't know that I ever really resorted to name calling, but like that was the kind of thing that was modeled to me. So when my partner told me like, hey, it really overwhelms me when you get really loud when we're talking or having a conflict, that was my thing to own. At the time, I was like, well, I'm just really amped about this and my volume goes up. But no, like safety is also signaled by like the loud noises, whatever. Like that was something I needed to hear and I needed to own. If there's other physical intimidation with slamming doors, or if you're in the car and they break, that's like a way of trying to scare you. And that's also a sign of abuse. It's not healthy. Another thing is if they're immediately defensive. Again, take this, with a grain of salt. I know that our first instincts as humans is to kind of be defensive. And really what that's coming from is they're afraid of being judged for their character. Like they're afraid that you're not seeing their good intent, or they're afraid that you're saying that they're a bad person. That's usually where defensiveness is coming from. So I will say that how we approach it can help with that a little bit, right? If we come in saying, hey, I'm sure you didn't mean this badly, but there was something about this that upset me. Can we talk about it? Right? That can help. But there's also people out there who cannot tolerate even a sniff of personal accountability and responsibility because they associate the two with them being bad. And there's no way that you could ever tell these people or present something to them that's going to make them not defensive. Like in their commitment to run from accountability, because of all the fear they have associated with it, they will always be defensive. And usually when they're defensive, they're going to try and turn it back around on you and, oh, but what about me? And name calling and escalating it or whatever it is. And we got to be able to see if no matter what you do, they're committed to that response. That's a sign that they do not have the emotional skills, maturity, motivation, whatever, to be in a healthy relationship. Because in order to be in a healthy relationship, you have to have healthy conflict resolution skills. Because again, ruptures are inevitable, but the conflict resolution to come back together and have an even stronger bond afterwards is what you need for emotional safety, for psychological safety in relationships. And if you're not with somebody who is working on actively or has some of those skills to be able to navigate conflict in a healthy way, you cannot have a healthy relationship with them. Some other signs: public criticism. In my example, if somebody would take the first opportunity to try and embarrass you or try to like make the fight that you guys might have like public or something, that's also a sign of toxicity in that. It's a sign of emotional maturity. Again, everything's kind of on a scale, so you gotta, kind of start to figure out the specifics for yourself, but that is also a big red flag. If they try to shut down the conversation, saying that like you're being too much or you're making too much of this, or they're trying to dismiss you in any way, that's a signal that they run from their own feelings and they can never meaningfully hear and address yours. And that is also something that is required in healthy relationships, is being able to honor and really consider and just have empathy for the other's feelings, even if they're not feelings that we have, even if we have a different opinion about the situation. Like really being able to hear and respond to our partner is something that we do when we care and when we have that base level emotional maturity. If they're always trying to switch it around and somehow make you the villain in every single conflict, that's also a sign that they can't tolerate responsibility, that they can't tolerate accountability. And you have to be with a partner who can tolerate being accountable and doing something wrong and hurting your feelings. Like we have to be able to accept that we do that sometimes in order to move through these situations in a healthy way. We have to. And again, if we ourselves or our partner is coupling taking accountability and doing something that hurts another person with we are a bad person, we're never going to be able to do that because again, our psyches, our bodies run from shame, run from the idea that we're inherently bad. So if you are somebody that really resists this idea and immediately gets defensive, if somebody points out something that you did wrong that was unintentional, that's something for you to work on as well. You can do something unintentionally and have an unintentionally, negative impact on somebody and still be a good person. And in fact, the way that you continue to be a good person is by being able to hear that and be able to say, this doesn't make me bad, but I can hear this and I can make an adjustment because I care about my impact on people, right? Like that sets us up all up for healthy stuff. I could do so much more on this, but my last tip that I have for this is that if you fear that there would be like a physical element that would come into this if they get too upset, or if you feel like you are doing most of the emotional labor to keep the conversation grounded, like if they tend to like flare up into anger or into rage, or if they just get so upset if you're not agreeing with them, or if you're not sort of like doing exactly what they want, and you know that if you don't de-escalate it, or if you don't stay really grounded and just kind of like shove down what you think just to like appease them and make them calm, that it could escalate to them hitting something or someone, that is a sign of an abusive dynamic. You should never be afraid for your physical safety in any way, just because there is a conflict of some sort. And if you are in a relationship with somebody, family member, friend, partner, where you really do think that that's a possibility, then there's a really good chance that you're in a relationship with somebody who cannot be a healthy co-creator of that relationship, that they are still choosing abusive dynamics and abusive behaviors in themselves, which means that they can never co-create a healthy relationship with somebody else. And so how you approach that relationship needs to be different if you even keep that relationship at all, versus one where you can be vulnerable and where you can have intimacy and where you can have safety and trust, right? And what I say is like, if it's with a family member, you want to maintain that relationship, like how you approach that's got to be different. Your expectations for that got to be different, and seeing it for what it is. If it's a friendship, hopefully you can let that go. And if it's a partnership, maybe there needs to be a come to Jesus moment, and that's also something that you're looking at letting go. But anyway, these big shifts in how we're really looking at relationships and our ability to assess if what's going on is healthy or unhealthy is really important if we want to influence more healthy community around us. And I wanted to detail sort of the compare and contrast of that, because I feel like a lot of us need that. We need to learn. We need somebody to explicitly explain it to us, because what we were modeled was not healthy. I'm pretty sure my group program is going to be about this topic. So again, go to the link in the bio, go to my website, sign up for the wait list if this is something that you'd want to learn about. And I'll see you all next week for more breakthroughs. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Breakthroughs with Bree. But before you go, please take a moment to either rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it, or share this episode or maybe one of your other favorites with friends or loved ones that you think might enjoy or benefit from this content. Both of those things help more than you know, so that I can keep creating these episodes to help us all have more breakthroughs. Remember, you can connect with me on social media, sign up for my email list, hear what products, services, or events that I'm currently offering, all in the link in the show description, or by visiting my website, healingwithbree.net. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support and for the time that you're taking to heal yourself and align more with your beautiful soul, as it helps us all so much more than you realize. I'll see you all next week for more breakthroughs.